Hey, how's it going, everyone? This is Dominick from the Comic Book Report YouTube channel over here doing another guest review for organicpricedbooks.com. And today I'm back with a DC Omnibus overview all the way back from the New 52 era. Of course, we're talking about the Swamp Thing New 52 Omnibus. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Scott Snyder and Charles Soule, and illustrated by so many different artists, including Yannick Paquette, Jesus Saiz, and more. The comics in this volume were published by DC Comics beginning all the way back in 2011. As far as what this volume collects, it does collect Swamp Thing issues 0 through 40, 23.1, Swamp Thing Annual issues 1 through 3, Swamp Thing Futures End issue 1, Animal Man issues 12 and 17, and finally Aquaman 31. Now this is an oversized hardcover edition with nice glossy print paper stock, a glued binding, and a total of 1,160 pages. Looking at the front cover for this omnibus, we have a cover taken from one of the issue covers. Absolutely gorgeous and very indicative of the kind of art we could see inside this omnibus, especially for the first half of the omnibus that was written by Scott Snyder. This art is very just the style you can expect. Overall, just a stunning design that's instantly captivating. And as we make our way to the spine of this omnibus, I have to say I'm a fan of that too. We have a great picture of Swampy at the top of the spine, then we have the great bright green lettering for Swamp Thing, and we actually have the New 52 omnibus that's in the same style as ones we find in other New 52 omnibuses. I can think of things like the Justice League New 52 omnibus, for example. So suffice it to say, it looks good on the bookcase. The back cover as well is really beautiful, has a lot of the same coloring and some really fun ornate design, and we have this almost watermarked looking face of Swamp Thing emerging from the text. Really just a stunning design. Overall, I love this dust jacket. And speaking of how much I like that dust jacket, I do want to spend one more minute just taking a look at this. I will go ahead and show the interior flaps this time as well, and then I'll go ahead and spread out that dust jacket so you can see everything at a glance. As I begin to fold everything out, though, I will say you might notice that the back cover and the back flap fold out to their own kind of wraparound looking back cover, but overall, this dust jacket, like I said, it's absolutely gorgeous. I really have no comments here other than I really dig it. Transitioning to the hardback book itself, though, the under the dust jacket artwork we have on the volume, I will say it's another great just piece of ornate artwork. We have a lot of the visual motifs we see throughout it. The same kind of lettering preserved from the dust jacket. We don't have any art necessarily or character models or action sequences printed on this, but I think the art we have on book is still really striking, and overall a really good choice for some of the exterior work. I don't really have any complaints here. I think DC did a great job with the visual style, graphics, everything to do with the exteriors. And now I wanted to go ahead and switch to a quick look at the binding for all you prospective collectors out there. I will say my binding had a little bit of an eye. This is a glued binding though. I did have some gutter loss. There were times I had to push the pages down to maybe read a text box or two. But overall, nothing too bad. I never really felt like it detracted too much from my reading experience. Would have loved a sewn binding, but still happy with what we got. Okay, and with that taken care of, we can jump into the book proper. Even from the end pages of this book, we're in for a treat. It is beautiful. Title pages is all great. We have some publication information, stuff about the creators of the issue, and then we start with an introduction from Len Wein, one of the co-creators of Swamp Thing. Really love to read this little essay. I think it really set the stage nicely. And then we're off to issue 1 of the New 52 era for Swamp Thing. This is written by Scott Snyder. Like I said earlier, he did write almost a little bit under half of this run, and then Charles Soule takes over for the remaining. But the first couple story arcs are all Scott Snyder, and this first portion of the book has some of the most dynamic artwork. We have a lot of those kind of kaleidoscopic, trippy, panel-breaking kind of effects you can see here, but really like the visual style here. I will say the front bit of this omnibus, especially the stuff written by Scott Snyder, it leans more into the body horror, darker elements for this mythos. So it feels like a kind of body horror movie mixed with a blockbuster action movie. That's how I really describe the tone and kind of genre for this first chapter. I won't go into too much of the storytelling because I don't want to spoil anything for you, but I will say it leans really heavy horror in the beginning, and after a kind of bigger event storyline, we transition writers over to Charles Soule, and that run really tones down some of the darkness and some of the horror elements. You still have it in there, but it feels like it leans more into fantasy and a lot of just kind of more understated storylines that are still really imaginative and fantastical, but are less like these epic blockbustery kind of moments. It does build to a crescendo even in this Charles Soule era, but I think a lot of his stories in that half of the book are a little bit more like they take their time or more character grounded as we get into the back half of this book. But the Scott Snyder stuff at the beginning is a thrill ride. You're really just going at a pretty breakneck speed through a really exciting couple chapters in the history of Swamp Thing. First major story arc is kind of a re-origin story for Swamp Thing, which is a lot of fun. Again, I won't spoil that because this is just a quick overview, but you have all that included. We have a couple tie-in issues with different franchises throughout this omnibus as well. Like I mentioned, a few issues of Animal Man and one of Aquaman. In both cases, these tie-in issues are kind of to serve the overall storyline. We might not have the comprehensive issues for both of those other franchises, but you get enough to read a kind of complete story. And I'm really happy with this era of Swamp Thing. Overall, it was very, very captivating. And even with both of these writers having very different styles for their Swamp Thing storytelling, it was still a very great experience. And one run did lead right into the next. The art change as well between those two runs was handled well. I think overall as a reader, I actually prefer the Charles Soule half of this book, which surprised me because I'm such a huge Scott Snyder fan, and I did like the work we get from here as well, but I found the stories in the back half to feel a little more reminiscent of the kind of Swamp Thing stories I would expect to read. Some of the earlier Swamp Thing stuff I read was like the Alan Moore era, and while this whole collection doesn't really touch that in my mind, it's still a very, very great run. I know some people, this is their favorite run on Swamp Thing. I certainly understand the argument for that, and honestly, it's up there for me. It's a really great run all the way throughout. I think that both of these writers did a great job expanding the lore or mythos for this franchise in some really meaningful ways. I do think it was still absolutely accessible to new readers. I think that it does expect you to know a few things, but I think that both authors do a really good job of kind of filling in the gaps you need to enjoy the storyline. Mentioned it earlier, but the art throughout it as well is exceptional. Even though we do have some artist changes, I think all the artists on this book are just absolutely commendable. Being in the darker side of the DC universe, I will say that this is one you might need to use your discretion on whether or not this is a read for you. I would say it's more toward a little bit more mature readers, maybe older teens for this book, but obviously your discretion advised. We do get into, like I said, more darker body horror elements, especially in the front half of this omnibus. At just shy of 1,200 pages, this is also a bigger omnibus, I would say. We have north of 40 issues, the entire run, as far as I'm concerned, of the New 52 era, and yet this was a really, really captivating read. I burned through this cover to cover in, I don't know, a week or so. This was one personally as well. I was reading these issues when they first came out in collected edition, roughly. I read the first maybe trade paperback or two, so the first maybe dozen issues, give or take. This was a run I always wanted to go back to, especially as I grew as a Swamp Thing fan, as a Scott Snyder fan, and eventually a Charles Soule fan, but I never quite made my way back to this run. I had sold my paperbacks some time ago, but I always had in the back of my mind, I hope to come back to it, and with this omnibus edition, getting to read it all in glossy print paper, oversized, it's really just a dream. This is also just a really dense collection. We have a lot of great storylines in it, it packs a lot of punch, and you get a pretty full reading experience. Toward the back of the omnibus, we do have some extras as well. I will say it's in the form of a lot of behind-the-scenes sketch work, pencil work, ink work, more like visual outlines, things like that. We don't have a ton of written work in the back and the extras, but a lot of behind-the-scenes, just imagery and kind of paneling work, things like that. I do really like seeing it, though. I'm really happy we still got a good handful of extras at the back of an already pretty big book. I'm always delighted as a collector seeing what I consider bonus features at the back of an omnibus like this, so way to go DC. I personally was really happy. And with that, we're just about making our way to the end of this book. Can you believe it? A really beautiful collection, like I said. I really just went through this quite quickly. If you're interested in picking up your own copy, I highly recommend you check out organicpricedbooks.com. And if you want a fuller review of this book, please check out my channel in the coming weeks, The Comic Book Report. I'd love to have you over there. I try to do more extensive comic book reviews, list videos. I dabble in live streams and shorts here and there. Anyway, thank you all so much for having me. I hope you've enjoyed this overview, and until next time, have a good one.